time for a Q&A. Patreon Q&A. Ian, how do you access the CU Podcast Patreon? I know you're going to get this right.
You go to patreon.com/CU Podcast. I wasn't actually screwing it up there. Pat almost knocked over something on his shelf.
Shit.
So I just wanted to make sure everything was
My Splatterhouse, man.
cool. All right, so yeah, you go there and you see the things that we do. You can pay us some money for them, and it's good.
Yeah, it's, first of all, you make it sound like it's a business transaction. Ian. No, it's showing support. Ian does his writing. He does a monthly hangout, and you can vote on a topic.
That's right.
So the topic that won this week by 42%. Are there big differences, Ian, between arcade and console collectors?
I'm gonna let you start that one off.
While I'm chewing, which is going to be great.
Why do you keep eating during the podcast? Jesus H. Christ.
Intermittent fasting, Ian.
I don't. Yeah, well,
Keep my energy level up.
for the fucking love of God. So I think the big differences between arcade and console collectors would be that there's probably a larger focus on preservation within the arcade scene. And I think with, at least I think preservation comes more naturally when you're an arcade collector, especially if you're an arcade collector who is the type who takes the machines to shows, puts them on display, wants to have them out there. A lot of times they're going to be restoring them, making sure they're in nice shape, presentable shape, because they want them to look good. It seems that, things like that, I can certainly say it about pinball machines. There's something to a pinball machine or an arcade machine, and keeping it in great working shape and keeping it looking nice, similar to people who would collect, say, classic or vintage cars. You not only want it running well, you not only want it for the historical value, but to a certain degree, you want to be able to show it off. You want it to look nice. You want to keep the value up there, and that inherently is good preservation-wise for the physical object, because it keeps it, you're keeping it in the shape, the aesthetic shape that you would have, that it would have been in when it originally came out. Console collecting, and obviously data is extremely important. Keeping the data there, dumping the ROMs, dumping the boards, but arcade machines. There's arcades and pinball. There is such a there's a lot of the arcade and pinball experience is there in the machine. You don't necessarily get it all with just the ROM. So there's something to be said about actually playing the machine and experiencing it with a nice cabinet or a nice machine. Whereas consoles were always about holding a controller and, say, looking at a TV. It's easier to recreate something similar to a console experience using emulation than it is to recreate an arcade experience using something like emulation.
Sure. I think you touched upon it. I think straight up, if you're an arcade collector, you're a preservationist whether you want to be or not.
Correct.
I mean, you are preserving literal machines that, for some of them, like, for example, a Budweiser Tapper, there can't be more than a couple of hundred that still exist, at most.
It was nice to play that at Cobra.
I mean, honestly, there might be 100 at most. I mean, one was fucking destroyed at Seaside Park.
Right.
Original Budweiser Tapper. It's not like you can reorder them. You can't get the parts anymore for this stuff easily. So whether you want to be or not, you're preserving these machines because the upkeep alone is preservation. Monitor replacing the caps on the monitor, printing out a better overlay so that it's not the original crusty one that's damaged from the arcade in the 80s with like cigarette burns and kids spilling soda on it. Replacing out buttons and micro switches. Maybe there's the marquee's cracked. You have to get a new marquee. So, like you said, it's very similar to any other, car collector owner, where you're not just your mission starts once you make the purchase. It doesn't end. If you're a game collector, once I buy, a baby boomer from Luna Video Games, 2 locations in San Diego, that's pretty much it for being a collector.
Yeah, you're not spending the next 2 years working on your baby boomer.
I mean, I might do that Q-tip there, but that's it. I can play it whenever I want, and that cartridge will probably last a few hundred years without me touching it. Those NES games that haven't died yet and they're 30 years old. Any arcade game requires upkeep. It eventually does. It's just a matter of when. So even if I can almost guarantee there has to be some arcade games out there that are probably from the 80s that are still like never been touched or used. You probably can't turn them on. There's probably something that went wrong with them still, like with the monitor.
It's possible,
over 30
yeah.
years. You know, when you buy them, I know someone that buys arcade machines trying to do a barcade potentially, and sometimes in between turning the machine on when you test it and getting it home, just from moving it, something might have went wrong inside.
Oh yeah, yeah. That's,
Something
that definitely
a
happens.
connection gets loose. Something happens. So the big difference is that yes, if you're an arcade collector, you are a preservationist by default. You are keeping them alive. You're not really keeping alive the experience of NES games being an NES collector, because first there's millions of them out there, and it's so much easier to replicate that, like you said, versus an arcade or pinball experience. And I think if you're an arcade enthusiast / collector, like to your point, you want to share that. If you are unless you're Jay Leno and has like fucking 100 cars sitting somewhere, if you are into restoring classic cars, you're going to show that off. You're going to say, hey, this is how this 1955 car looked.
Right.
Brand new. There's not a big opportunity to see that ever. It's very special. The same way with some of these arcade machines. There's always at least one machine. I forget the one offhand at Game On. There was one arcade machine I don't remember ever seeing in person before. And I was just like, well, I never saw that one before. And that still happens at arcades where I'll be like, oh, I never saw that machine before.
Yeah.
Because there are games that either weren't popular at the time or even popular at the time and got thrown out, got destroyed, or got converted over that you don't find clean examples of it anymore, or sometimes even nice examples of. So yeah, if you're an arcade collector, you're on another level where I think your responsibility is that much more because there aren't as many out there, and I think in general they are shared more through either just barcades, bringing them out to conventions, having meetups like SC3, which I haven't been to in like 4 or 5 years. It's an experience that you're sharing more, I think, when you're an arcade collector versus a console.